Hi, this is Tom Soane, and today I've seen a question from Prim, and Prim has asked, how do you assess the roof of a property at a viewing before you make an offer and before you buy the property? So do you know what, that's a really good question actually, Prim, because the roof of a property can cause so many more problems throughout the entire building than just within the roof itself. So there are some very definite checks you can do from outside the property, just visual checks that you can do, and also from inside the property as well. So I'll go through both external checks and internal checks as well. But the first thing I want you to remember is water. Now, I don't just mean drink enough water, I mean water in your property or in the property that you're looking at, because water is probably the biggest killer of properties that there could be. There are a few big problems for properties, but water is one of those big ones. So we're going to check for that as well. Now, I want you to go outside the property and go over the road and get into a position where you can see as much of the roof as possible, as many of the tiles as possible. Now have a look at those tiles, and pretty simple check first of all. If you can see any defects in those tiles, like for an example, there's gaps in the tiling, there's a lot of broken tiles, things like that, or maybe just skew whiff tiles, you'll see it, just defects within those tiles, then the chances are water could probably get into the roof through the gaps or the holes or the damage to those tiles. So look, that's not an impossible thing to fix. It's not actually that expensive to fix bad tiles or defective tiles. Just needs to be calculated into your refurbishment. Now, of course, with all of this, you're going to get a specialist, right? You're going to get a roofing specialist. You're going to get a surveyor to check these things anyway. But these are just, I guess, visual checks that you can just do, and hopefully it'll give you a bit of a better idea. So anyway, the next thing you can do from outside the property is check the lead flashing. Now the lead flashing it looks like the sealant, which is around the edges of the roof itself. It looks like a grey, silvery type thing. It might be black or a very dark grey, but it looks like it sounds. It's like a lead covering around the edges of the roof and also around the chimney stack too. Now, if you can see in that lead flashing that it's bent upwards or it's damaged or there's parts missing, then again, water is likely to be able to run off the tiles straight into your property. And a big problem with that is that it can get into the cavity of the walls. And the cavity is the gap inside your actual wall. And then that moisture drops down to the bottom of the property. It sits there, it goes mouldy, it makes things rotten, it gets into all the brickwork, it just causes tons of havoc. Now again, that is treatable. The lead flashing is treatable and the water ingress in the property is treatable, but it costs money. So you need to make sure you're calculating that as well. Again, speak to a roofer, find out, look, on a standard 3-bedroom house or whatever it is you're looking at, how much do you reckon it would cost to replace all of the lead flashing? They'll be able to give you a figure for that. Or if they're reluctant to give you a figure, get them to give you a guide price, a ballpark figure, a rough estimate, something like that. The next thing to have a look at as well, if you're looking at the roofing area, is standing over the road again. Just check and see if it's flat. If it sags at any part of that roof, that can be a number of things. It might just be the age of the property. It might well be the felt underneath the tiles. It might be something very serious like the wood or the whole roof structure might need further inspection. Now that will start getting expensive if it's a structural thing, so check that out. Also, just a couple of extra things around the roof as well. If you have a look at the fascia, now that is the part underneath the guttering. It looks like a bit of boxing in. Sometimes it's plastic, sometimes it's wood. Normally they're coloured, so people actually paint them whites and greens or whatever you want to do it. Just check that. If that looks like shit, then it's probably going to need replacing at some point. You can also check the guttering. Now, guttering is there's a couple of different areas to look at with guttering. If you can see blockages, then the chances are that the guttering will have filled up with water, and that water may well escape over the brickwork into the actual wall itself. And that will again cause problems with the rest of the building. But again, now your roof should have protection from that. So there should be it looks like a little lip that drops down, protecting the roof from the gutter. And allowing the water to drop off into the gutter or around, but sometimes there are defects with that too. So again, what we're checking for is, can water get into my property? If I buy this place, can water get in, or has water got in before? And if you can ask that question, then you can then find where that water might get in. Also, when you're looking at the chimney, for an example, if you can see any cracking in there, again, water may well get into the brickwork. Now, by the way, while we're talking about that, if you can see up and around that chimney stack, there's a lot of white powder. This is going to take some decent eyesight or maybe some binoculars. White powder is another sign of water ingress on the front of the brick. It might not be, but it might be. And also the pointing, the in between each brick, if that looks a bit defective, then again, water might be able to get into that. So yeah, from outside the property, you can check the tiles to make sure they are intact and there's no holes. You're not going to be able to check the felt on the property, so you might need a specialist to have a look at that, but you might be able to check it internally, but we'll get to that. The lead flashing around the edges of the roof is something to check too. The guttering, the fascias, and the brickwork, basically. So you're checking from outside the property to see if any water can get into your property or the property you're about to buy. Now, when you go into the property, there are loads more checks, by the way, and a roofing specialist would be able to do miles more checks than I could just give you here on a video. So now when you go into the property, you hopefully should be able to get your head into the loft, or at least you might even be able to get into the loft completely. And if you could do that, what I want you to check for is daylight. If you can see daylight at any area of that roof, then the chances are, if you can see out, water can get in. And that's where you can then link that up with tiles. So you looked from outside that you saw there was a couple of holes in the tiling or a couple of gaps or a few damaged tiles. Then have a look and say, there's that damaged tile. It might just be a case of replacing a couple of tiles. It might be something more serious though. So have a look around all the edges, have a look around the whole structure of the roof and see if you can see any daylight. That will need plugging in. And remember the rule, if you can see out, water can get in. And that's what you don't want. You do not want water getting anywhere into your property or into the walls. The next thing you can look at from inside is the wood structure of the roof. Now, if you can see little holes in all of the woodwork up there, then you've probably got woodworm in there at some way or somehow. That's a problem. You'll need to get that replaced. You can also smell. If you can smell that damp, musty, moldy water smell, that means water has got into the property. Now, perhaps more seriously, if the wood looks wet or it looks in any way crumbling or something like that, then you might have a much more serious problem with rotten wood. Now that is a danger because rotten wood at some point is just going to give way. So you need to make sure you're looking for that. Now these are all visual checks, right? I'm not saying you're going to turn into an overnight roofing specialist or a surveyor, but if you're going around a property and you can spot these things, then that gives you an insight into how much money you might need to spend. Now, you might not have to spend a ton of money for those things. They might be quite simple. They might be simple fixes. But you just need to know about them before you make an offer. Now, if you're going around a property with a builder, then the builder will be able to see that, and he or she could give you a quote, a rough idea of what sort of costs you're looking at. Now, another quick tip: if you're on the landing of the property, so you go to go up the stairs, and just below where your roof is, have a look at the ceiling. If you can see any leaks or any stains or any sagging, put your hand on the ceiling if you can. If you're tall like me, I'm 6'5", I can normally reach most ceilings. Put your hand on that ceiling. If it's really cold, or even worse, if it's wet, then water is coming in through that roof and you'll need to get that attended to. It might also mean that you'll need to replaster, or even worse, further attention on the ceiling as well. Now, if there is water coming in through your roof or the roof of the property that you're thinking of buying, the chances are that there's going to be damp around the ground floor of the property too, or maybe in the corners of the properties. You can always tell when there's water coming in through the roof, because normally it's concentrated to each end of the gutter or around where the lead flashing is, and it normally concentrates in the corners of a room. Now, that's not all the time, sometimes it doesn't, but if you go into the bedrooms and have a look in the corners, if that's where you can see leaks and damp and mold and things like that, then the chances are there's water coming in from the roof. Again, not the end of the world. You might need to do a bit of replastering inside, you might need to do a bit of roof work, you might need to do some lead flashing work, you might need to do some work in the loft. But either way, as long as you know what to check for at the viewing, then you should be able to account for that. And then you make your offer accordingly. And be honest with the seller or the agent or whoever you're buying with. Just say, hey, look, I've seen the defect here. I think that there's some problems with the roof. This is what I roughly think it's going to cost to fix. I always think it's best to be honest in those situations, right? If you've got something to talk about, something to say, just be honest. Don't try and blag people. Don't try and pull the wool over anyone's eyes. Just say it as it is and leave it for them to make the decision as to whether they want to accept your offer or not. So those are just a few checks that you can do. Like I say, obviously you want to get a surveyor out there. Obviously you want to get a roofing specialist or somebody who knows what they're doing. If that's you, then great, go for it. But there is no, you know what, it's all on you. I guess is what I was going to say, is that it's all on you. If you go out and look for these things yourself, then it is all on you. So Prim, hope that answers your questions for things that you can check at a viewing before you buy a property. If there's anything you found, hey, if you want to take some photos, send them to me of anything you've seen which is a bit suspicious, and I'll hopefully help you out. I'll give you some advice. I'll definitely give you whatever advice I can give you, and hopefully it helps you avoid some dodgy properties, or it helps you buy a property at a really good price because there are things that need to be done. So hope that helps. That's how to check for roof defects at a viewing. And again, this is just one more thing, isn't it? One more thing to be the best version of yourself. And it's like I always say, if you're going to be the best version of yourself at this one thing, checking roofs, then you've got to be the best version of yourself at everything. My name's Tom Soane, and this is another Anonymous Landlord episode.